The plain stretched wide and empty under a sky the color of washed denim. The wind forever restless, forever pushing the world forward as if it refused to let anything settle too long. Dust drifted across the broken fences and pale grass, threading through the quiet settlement of Briar Hollow. Most days the town looked tired. Today it looked weary. At the far edge stood the Harrow farmhouse, a sagging building with shingles missing and porch boards warped from years of storms. From a distance it seemed abandoned, but up close you could see the small signs that someone still fought to keep it alive. A swept step here, a patched window there, herbs drying on the railing that the wind had half scattered. The widow Harrow stepped out of the doorway that morning, wiping her hands on a faded apron. Her shoulders stooped from hardship long before dawn broke. She took a slow breath as if preparing for battle, because in her own quiet way she was. Everyone in Briar Hollow knew her story, whether they spoke of it or merely whispered behind her back. She was born Martha Harrow of the giant kin, one of the few giant-blooded folk who had chosen to live among humans instead of the mountain enclaves. Her late husband, Bram, had been one of the last towering full-bloods, gentle as a mountain breeze despite being able to uproot a fence post with one arm. Most townsfolk never bothered to know him beyond his size. But the Harrows had found a life anyway, carving out their own little piece of land, raising a daughter they cherished with fierce, bright love. Their daughter, Ilara, had grown tall as the barn rafters, her head nearly touching the top of most doorframes, stronger than anyone around her, but with a quiet voice that trembled whenever strangers stared. She had her father's height, her mother's soft eyes, and the careful kindness of someone who learned early that the world breaks gentle things first. After Bram died, the widow had tried desperately to keep their world together, mending fences, tending crops, patching roofs. But the land was too much for one woman. And Ilara, though strong, was only one person, one heart. One young woman facing a world that didn't try to understand her. And so Martha Harrow did the one thing she had vowed she'd never do. She asked for help. But not the kind Briar Hollow was willing to offer. "Will you be my daughter's life partner?" That was the essence of her plea, even if she softened the words with kindness. The giant kin, like many old cultures, held traditions of partnership far deeper than courtship. It wasn't about romance alone, it was a bond of work, of shared burden, of loyalty. Ilara needed someone to help her tend the land, someone to stand beside her in a world that stared at her like a legend come to life, but asking it out loud in a human town, that was inviting cruelty. Still, Martha straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and started down the dusty path toward town. The town square always carried its own morning noise, hammering from the smithy, chatter from the bakery steps, boots scraping across the porch outside the general store. But the moment the widow Harrow and her towering daughter appeared, conversations faltered, faces turned, eyes narrowed. Ilara walked behind her mother, trying to appear smaller. Even though she couldn't, her long shadow stretched across the uneven boards of the general store's porch as she waited quietly, hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles whitened. Martha approached a group of men lounging near the hitching rails. They were discussing cattle prices and water rights, simple, ordinary things, until she halted a few feet away. "Morning," she said quietly, forcing a small smile. "Can I have just a moment of your time?" The men exchanged glances, stiffened a little, then nodded, mostly out of obligation. Martha cleared her throat. "I know I asked last week, and the week before, and I know you're tired of hearing it, but I must ask again." Already their expressions soured. "My daughter can't tend our land alone," Martha said, gesturing back toward Ilara. "She needs a partner, a life bond, someone to help build a future with her. She's a good girl, gentle, hardworking, loyal as they come." One man snorted. Another pretended to adjust his hat to hide a smirk. Martha continued anyway. "I am asking, pleading for someone who'd be willing to join our family, to work with her, to share the burdens, to give her a chance at a life." A long, uncomfortable silence followed. Then the muttering began. "You're asking too much, Martha. It ain't natural. Giant kin don't mix with us. She's too big, too different. Who'd want to partner with her?" "No offense." A few men walked away without waiting for her response. One laughed as he went. Another mumbled something sharp about monster blood before spitting in the dust. Each word carved a deeper cut into Martha's composure, but she kept her chin up. Behind her, Alara flinched at every insult like she was being hit. "I'm sorry, Martha," one man muttered at last, not looking at her. "Ain't nobody here willing. You should take her back to the mountains where her folk are. Maybe someone there will take her in." The implication stung. Alara bowed her head immediately. "Mama, let's go home. Please, they don't have to listen." The widow Harrow closed her eyes briefly, fighting the humiliation that burned deep. She had known they would say no. She had known they would laugh. But hope makes fools of people who need it badly enough. Her voice cracked. I want her to have a future, something better than this." No one answered. No one stayed to try, and so the widow sank onto the steps outside the store, shoulders trembling as she pressed her face into her hands. "I've failed you, Alara," she whispered, choking on the words. "I've asked every man from the hollow to the river. No one wants a giant kin daughter. They think you're strange, dangerous, less than human." Alara knelt beside her, folding her long limbs carefully so she wouldn't break a board. She wrapped one large arm around her mother's shoulders and spoke softly. "Mama, you haven't failed me. You've given me everything. I don't need someone to choose me. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," Martha insisted fiercely, wiping at her cheeks. "You're my heart." The wind creaked the sign above them. Dust swirled. For a moment, the world was painfully still. Then, footsteps, slow, heavy, purposeful. A tall, lean man approached through the settling dust, his hat in one hand, the morning sun carving sharp lines across his weathered face. Ronan Hale, the rancher from the northern ridge. Quiet, reclusive, known for saying little and working hard. He stopped a few feet from the widow and her daughter, eyes calm, thoughtful. "I heard your ask," he said simply, and unlike every other man that day, he hadn't turned away. Strange, the sun drifted low across the sky, turning the northern ridge a soft bronze that seemed to glow from within. Long shadows stretched across the land like quiet fingers, reaching out to steady a world that had been trembling for too long. Ronan Hale led the widow Harrow and her towering daughter up the narrow dirt path toward his ranch, the wind rustling through the dry grass in gentle sweeping waves. Ronan walked with a slow, even pace, like a man who had learned patience through necessity rather than choice. His boots were dusty, his coat worn from years of sun and wind, and his hat hung from 2 fingers as he gestured toward the fields. "My place ain't much to look at," he said, glancing back at the pair. "But it's home. Has been most of my life." Alara's long strides were careful, almost hesitant, her heavy footsteps sinking into the earth without a sound. She kept several paces behind him, afraid to appear imposing. Her height made the landscape look small. Fence posts barely rose to her waist. Every step she took felt like she was trespassing in a world made too small for her. The widow Harrow studied Ronan with a mixture of hope and worry. She still couldn't quite believe a man had stepped forward, had spoken with sincerity, not mockery. She kept glancing at him as if expecting him to change his mind at any moment. They reached the outer fence line first, where weather-beaten rails leaned like tired old men trying their best to remain upright. "You did all this alone?" the widow asked softly. Ronan shrugged. "What I could. The rest I let fall apart." Alara stepped forward instinctively and lifted one of the fallen rails. The heavy wood slid into her hand as if it weighed nothing. She set it back into place with gentle precision. Ronan watched her with open admiration. "You've a careful touch," he said. "Most folks strong as you tend to break more than they fix." Alara lowered her gaze, embarrassed but pleased. "I learned early," she murmured. "When you're this big, everything is fragile." The simple honesty of her words tugged at something quiet in Ronan's chest. They continued walking, passing the west pasture, where a few cattle grazed lazily. Ronan's dog, a gray mutt named Marble, trotted up to them with curious eyes. At first sight of Alara, she paused, then sniffed the air, then wagged her tail and trotted right up to her enormous legs, nudging them playfully. Alara froze, startled. "She's not afraid of me?" Ronan chuckled. "Marble ain't afraid of thunderstorms or gunshots. Or giants, apparently." Alara bent down and the dog let her enormous hand gently scratch behind its ears. Marble pressed into her touch, tail thumping. A small smile flickered across Alara's face, the first true one Martha had seen from her in days. They approached the barn next. It stood tall, but bowed slightly at the middle like an old man with one too many winters on his back. Boards were missing along the roof line and the door hung. "Mind your head," he said automatically, then blinked as he realized who he was talking to. Ilara ducked deeply, stepping into the dim interior where dust motes floated like drifting stars. She touched the rafters lightly. "The beams are cracked," she observed. "Winter storms will push the roof in." "I know," Ronan admitted. "Couldn't fix him alone." "I can help," she offered without hesitation. "I can lift the beams while you reinforce the joints, and I can widen the doorway, if you'll let me." Ronan's lips tugged into a humble smile.
"You're welcome to fix anything you see fit."
"I'd be grateful for it." She glanced back toward the doorway, her massive frame framed by the fading sunset. "I don't want to overstep." "You're not," Ronan said firmly. "You're offering help. That's something rare around here." The widow Harrow clasped her hands together, watching the exchange with a cautious, trembling hope. She stepped forward, her voice gentle. "Ronan, I need to know. Are you doing this out of kindness or pity?" He straightened, surprised by the question. "Neither, ma'am. I'm doing it because I've been living alone too long. And because your daughter, she carries a strength most folks don't understand. I respect that." Ilara stiffened slightly, uncertain if she should speak, but Ronan turned to her before she could retreat behind silence. "Ilara," he said quietly, "I ain't blind. I can see the way folks look at you in town, like you're something strange. Something to whisper about." She swallowed hard and nodded faintly. "But I don't see that," he continued. "I see someone who works hard. Someone who ain't afraid of a challenge. Someone who knows what it's like to feel out of place but still tries to belong." Her breath hitched. "Up here on the ridge," Ronan said, "quiet is easy to find. But peace, that's harder. I haven't had it in years, but when you walked up my path just now, it felt like something shifted." Ilara blinked rapidly, her composure shaking under the weight of kindness she wasn't used to receiving. "You really don't mind?" "How big I am?" she whispered. "Mind?" Ronan stepped closer, close, enough that he had to tilt his head far back just to meet her eyes. "Ilara, your height doesn't scare me. Your strength doesn't scare me. There ain't a thing about you that scares me." Her lower lip trembled. He lifted a hand slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away. But she didn't. He rested his palm gently against the back of her hand, small against her, enormous fingers but steady. "Truth is," Ronan said softly, "I admire you." The widow Harrow pressed a hand to her heart, eyes glistening. Ilara lowered herself onto one knee so she could look at him without towering quite so high. Dust rose in a soft cloud around her as she settled. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say what's true," Ronan replied. She took a deep breath, gathering words, the way she might gather fragile eggs, carefully, afraid they might break. "I've spent most of my life thinking no one would want to walk beside me. I'm always too tall, too strong, too strange. People stare at me like I'm a story told around a fire." She hesitated. "I don't want to be alone anymore, but I don't want someone who chooses me out of loneliness either." Ronan's eyes softened. "Then let me say it plain." He took another step closer. "I choose you because you're someone worth choosing." The barn fell quiet except for the distant lowing of cattle and the soft whistle of the evening breeze. Ilara closed her eyes briefly, touched by a feeling she had never known. When she opened them again, they shone like stormlight. "If you truly want this life bond," she whispered, "I will give it everything I have." Ronan nodded once with the certainty of a man planting his boots in the earth. "I do." The widow Harrow exhaled a sob that was half relief, half joy. She covered her mouth, shaking, unable to speak. Ilara extended her hand, massive, trembling, hopeful. Ronan placed his much smaller one into hers without hesitation. And in the golden hush of a frontier evening, beneath a barn older than all their tragedies, the giant daughter and the quiet rancher took the first step toward a life neither believed they could have. A life where neither of them had to stand alone ever again.